right there is the point where the pilot flying would normally bring the airplane up to about 12 degrees nose up. The gear should be almost completely up into the airplane at this point. It hasn't budged an inch. You're going to see on a 787 the ends of the wings start to bend a little bit. They usually bend a lot more than this airplane. Why? Because as the airplane's picking up speed and it's picking up lift over those wings, those composite wings really bend. That is an indication, a visual indication, they're really getting a lot of lift. This 787 is not getting a lot of lift right now, but nothing's going on with the engines as far as I can see. Now, let me continue with this. At this point, watch the nose. It starts to go over right there. It starts to come back over. Why is it doing that? Here's what I think happened. And again, folks, this is just my opinion. This is a theory, that one theory among many. Any of the others I could have shared with you up to this point could be absolutely right. But why do I think this one is more likely than the other two? Here's why. I think the pilot flying said to the co-pilot, gear up at the appropriate time. I think the co-pilot grabbed the flap handle and raised the flaps instead of the gear. If that happened, and this is a big if that happened, this explains a lot of why this airplane stopped flying, why the lift over the wings died. Because at that point now, the flaps are retracting, all that extra lift you're producing in the wings goes away. You're already slow, you already got the power pushed up all the way. This airplane's as heavy as it's ever going to be in this flight, and you still got those great big landing gear out there producing all sorts of drag. This is a bad combination at this point. You see the nose now start to come over. Now, why would the nose come over? Because the airplane is trying to create as much lift as it can over those wings. And if the flaps are coming up, it's going to nose over to get even more airflow over those wings. That's going to be a very, very uncomfortable feeling for the pilot at the controls. Why? Because he's losing airspeed and he's going to begin to lose altitude now. Remember, he thinks the gear has come up. He might not know that the flaps came up. He just sees a motion over next to him, and he's looking outside going, wait, what's going on? It's all very confusing, and it all happens in a split second. Let's watch. The airplane starts to settle in. It starts to now descend. You see the pilot start to pull the nose up a little bit more, okay? As he's getting closer to the ground, he's probably got the power pushed up all he can, and now I think he's going to get into a power on stall. Not enough lift is being produced by those wings. All that drag is being produced by the landing gear that's still out there. Could anything have saved the day at this point? Maybe if they'd raised the gear. Maybe if they'd raised the gear and put the flaps back out. But it's very unlikely that once this gets to this point that they can recover from it. And now watch what happens. The airplane begins to kind of wallow, right? The pilot pulls back even more on the nose. That aggravates the whole thing. And now you get this waddle into the ground, and it's in a controlled power on stall until it impacts the ground. If they had 1,500 feet or 1,000 feet even to lower that nose and gain that airspeed back, they might have been able to fly out of it. They don't have the luxury. I don't think this airplane got higher than 500-600 feet. And then when they start to waddle down, they're down at 200 feet. They just can't lower the nose, and the airplane just kind of does a power on descent into the ground. So that's my theory. Now, I could be completely wrong about this, but the flight characteristics look to me to be an airplane that doesn't have enough lift coming over the wings. And the only way that could happen is if they didn't have the proper flap setting. So however they got to an improper flap setting, it's inconceivable in my mind that they actually did that takeoff roll without the flaps out, because the bells and the horns and everything else that would be going on at that point, there's still no indication that either of the engines failed. And this airplane can fly just fine on one engine at any gross weight. It will climb out no problem on one engine. So the idea that both engines failed at the same time, again, is like a trillion to one shot. And, you know, now in the days to come, we might find out that they did ingest a flock of birds into both, and that we just didn't see any indication of it out the back of the engines. It could have been fuel contamination. That's a possibility, but again, it's very unlikely. A loss of power is not the same as a loss of lift. A loss of power will contribute to a loss of lift, but you can have a loss of lift without a loss of power. And that would mean that the wing would have to be configured wrongly or poorly for that phase of flight. This is the most critical phase of flight. You're the heaviest you're ever going to be. You're the slowest you're ever going to be. And you have all your power up within about 10% of your power. You could push a little bit more up, but you don't have a lot of reserve power. All of those things are working against you. And if you leave that big old landing gear out there, man, it really starts to cause a drag effect that's going to cause the airspeed to bleed off. It's going to force that nose to come over. You're going to start to lose altitude quickly. The only thing the pilot can do as he sees the ground coming up is pull back on that nose. And my friends, it's very sad. I feel so sorry for these pilots. I think they tried valiantly to save this airplane, but this may have been simply a tragic mistake. Now, I hope that it wasn't. I hope maybe there was some other explanation for it, but hoping that it was a mechanical failure or some other explanation will not bring any of these people back. And it's just sad. It's been a very bitter time in aviation, and we see now the loss for the first time of a 787. I hope in the long run that that's the last 787 crash we ever have to witness, whether it was over in India or here in the US or over in the UK, anywhere around the world. We don't want to have to do commentary on any of these such accidents. Now, in the days to come, as we get the black box information, I've heard that the NTSB is going over to India to help. I've heard Boeing is headed over there to help. We're going to hopefully get information sooner rather than later from those sources. And as we do, we will bring you additional information, amplifying information. And if I need to make a correction, I'll be the first guy to make a correction. But this is very, very early on. This is what we know up to this point. And as we get more information, we'll share it with you as we go. Now you know. I'm Captain Steve. Fly safe.